Welcome to Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie Valentine and the host of this podcast. I'm a physician, evidential psychic medium, international keynote speaker, and author of Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul, an inspirational story about transformation, healing, and spirituality, available online at Amazon as well as other online platforms worldwide. The inspiration for this podcast came from my own life experiences. As I have journeyed through life, it has taught me that we're part of a greater divine web of interconnectedness. I have walked the path of illness, healing, and transformation. After 2 near-death experiences, I became clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient, and was guided to attend medical school at the age of 54. We will be meeting with many different types of doctors, healers, as well as spiritual leaders, educators, and other inspiring souls in this podcast. It is my hope that you will gain information and create a path to healing your own life, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and bridge the gap between science and soul. If you are a person who understands the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul, and would like to take one of my courses or work with me to create a path of healing your own life, please visit divinespiritualessence.com or drlottie.com. Welcome to Dr. Lottie Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie, and today I'm honored to introduce Dr. BethAnne. Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright is a licensed doctor of psychology and is deeply passionate about inspiring authentic change in others. As a spiritual psychologist, intuitive channel, author, master teacher, and artist, she blends the worlds of psychology and spirit to offer dynamic teaching on personal transformation and personal development. Dr. BethAnne's life underwent a profound change after her brother's abrupt and sudden death in 2016. Her traumatic loss resulted in a parting gift, that of extraordinary intuition and psychic abilities, and she is known as the Psychic Psychologist. Through her unique healing gifts of word magic, multidimensional wisdom, and heart-based transmissions, and as an award-winning author on grief, Dr. BethAnne provides answers and guidance blended from her therapeutic background to the higher spiritual perspective to people's life challenges and questions. Individuals can then understand their soul language, needs, and purpose while transforming blocks, anxiety, trauma, fears, and loss. Dr. BethAnne provides consultations to corporate C-suite members, business owners, healers, and those focused on personal or leadership growth. She guides her clients to ask the right questions and understand the depths and all aspects of the answers to move them forward to heal, grow, expand, and enjoy enduring personal power, mastery, freedom, and joy. So welcome, Dr. BethAnne. I'm so delighted to have you as a guest today.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And I was thinking today, before we even hopped on this call together, how much it is a privilege and a joy whenever I get to dialogue with somebody in the field who's all about spreading love and awareness and light and wellness. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's really fun to run this podcast because I meet so many other people that are running parallel to my own purpose here on earth, and you're one of these people, so I can't wait to ask you all the different questions I have for you today. So you've been a licensed psychologist in private practice for 2 decades. How can we learn to stay grounded and navigate during these challenging times?
That is the question right now, isn't it? One of the things that I've started shifting a little bit is thinking about these challenging times more as times of transforming possibilities and shifting possibilities. And they can be challenging, but there can also be so much beauty and so much new energy that's been opening up as we move forward, as humanity in 2021 and beyond. And to me, being grounded is being in our bodies. It is being in our own energy. It is finding a way to come back into our sense of center and our sense of safety and home base inside of ourselves. So my number one tip or idea for how to do this is to find the set point inside of you, the emotional set point, something that you can tune into that allows you to return to yourself. And that might be tuning into the energy of love. It might be tuning into the energy of nature because nature's inherently grounding. It could be tuning into joy or just how you feel at your most authentic expression, but finding a way that you can sort of shift your own, like if you had a radio dial and you could just tune into the frequency of groundedness within yourself. I think we need something where we can come back to ourselves.
Yeah, that's very good advice. I know you also talk a lot about self-trust, and that is kind of a theme in your work. Why do you think it's so difficult for people to trust themselves? And how can we begin to heal our relationship with self-trust?
Self-trust. I think when so many of us were raised from the get-go, being taught that we can't trust ourselves. And examples of this might look like, especially energetically sensitive people, we were usually the ones who could pick up on dynamics in the room or maybe feel what somebody else was feeling. And particularly if that happened during childhood, and you were the person who said, I think my parents might be feeling this, or I think this person is experiencing this. And we came forward with that information and we said, well, that's not it at all, or you're getting that wrong, or you're crazy, or you're not picking up on that. I just think there's layer after layer within our individual histories, whether it came from our families or our peers growing up, or the bigger message of society that said, this is how you're supposed to be. And if you fall outside of that, there's something wrong with you. And so it makes it really hard to develop a self-trusting relationship, particularly as we begin to want to live more authentically or intuitively and really listen to our inner guidance. So I see it more as being like layer over layer over layer of woundedness around that. And I think healing that comes in many ways, but the biggest pieces that I see is number one, knowing where the wounds are. I think exploring the self-trust wound and understanding what each of our unique layers of woundedness are and where they came from is a key to freedom. And then I think the second piece is really beginning to work on redeveloping our relationship with realizing that we can trust ourselves. We can trust ourselves to make mistakes and to figure life out. We can trust ourselves to be imperfect and to learn as we go. I don't think self-trust means that we have to know everything, that we have to always get it right, that we have to do it perfectly. That's like a saboteur of self-trust. I think it means that we trust that as we go on our journey, we will figure it out. And we will find what we need to continue forth in a way that most aligns with ourselves.
So I know that it's a theme in your work, and you work a lot with that. How did you get into it? Did you have a lot of clients that you saw this was a theme for many people?
I love this question because sort of, but really my gateway into it was myself. It was myself, and it was when I had left private practice and came to the island of Kauai. And as I started to put my work forward and step up in bigger ways where I began to teach and I began to share on bigger stages, I all of a sudden encountered all this fear in me and all this self-doubt and all these voices inside of me that told me either I couldn't do it or that just wanted to put fear in place of faith. And so I actually began doing a lot of profound self-work around self-doubt and rooting out self-doubt. And as I began to heal those self-doubts and recognize where they came from, I started doing a lot of affirmation work with self-trust and really just walking through affirmations where I would just sit there and say, I can trust myself. I can trust my experience of self. I can trust my emotional experience of self, my physical experience. I've done this before where I have lists of all sorts of aspects of trust. And that was so effective with me. And I found it so empowering. And I realized I was really rewiring those old networks of thinking that told me I couldn't trust myself. That encouraged me to start to take that into my work with clients and into my work with groups and do self-trust meditations and self-trust exercises to allow other individuals to begin to experience what does it feel like to affirm, I can trust my experience of self.
Yeah, that's just beautiful. And I asked the questions because I figured it probably began with yourself. As many healers and psychologists and doctors, we end up helping people because it's something we work through ourselves, and so we get really good at it. Just like a Lyme doctor who is a specialist in Lyme most likely had Lyme himself, or many times did, right? Now we shouldn't say most likely, but it is how people get into a specific field of something, is because that healer or doctor or psychologist worked through that themselves in one way or another.
Absolutely. I think a lot of doctors and healers identify with the wounded healer archetype and that idea that we healed our own wound around it and turned around and use that to help transform others and help them find what they needed to find healing for that wound. So yes, we are often our own gateway to whatever it is that we are going to bring out into the world in bigger healing ways.
Right.
Yes.
When I went through med school, there was one teacher that said, if you can't, you have to heal yourself, because you're not going to be able to heal other people if you haven't had the ability to heal yourself first. And it wasn't until I got out of med school that I really understood, what that teacher really meant when they said that, because there is truth to that, and you become better at those specific things that you work through yourself.
It's true. That's really beautiful wisdom. It makes me think of schools in psychology that really recommend that before you are the therapist, you're the client, and that you understand what it is to go through that process. So you know what it is to be on both sides and to have compassion and understanding of both sides. I think we need to be able to look on both sides of the mirror and see our reflection in different ways in order to have a full understanding of a healing journey.
Yeah, that's so true. And we're going to talk about your healing journey in a bit. I know that you're known as the psychic psychologist. How does information come to you, and can you teach this skill or gift?
What a great question. Information comes to me through really all senses, but the ones that are the most prevalent for me is having a sense of a clairvoyance, I think it's usually called, where I'll see pictures and images in my mind. It's also easy for me to feel what somebody else might be experiencing or to get a feeling about a situation. A lot of times it's just direct knowing. And before I really understood what my gifts were, I found that I was using them as a psychologist, and I had this uncanny knack for having, insights or some sort of feedback for a client that they would say, that's exactly how I feel, or that's so spot on. And I had no idea that I was organically just tapping into innate intuitive gifts that I already had. And as I've gone on and my gifts opened up and I've developed those, I can work with the Akashic records now, or ask for angel messages so that I can be more intentional about it if I want or need something for a client. So there's been an expansion of that. And can other people learn? Absolutely. I believe that we are all intuitive, not in the same ways. And so the way that information presents itself to me might be completely different from how it represents or presents itself to somebody else. But I do think that everybody has some form of an intuitive or psychic spark inside of them that can be developed. And I don't see these things so much as supernatural. I see them as part of our divine birthright. I just think we've forgotten, and that the culture that we're in has sort of relegated them to this sort of side stream, where it's not mainstream. And so that feels really foreign to a lot of people. And yet I wonder if we were just raised in a place that told us you're naturally intuitive, and here's a whole list of ways that might come through, how much more open people might be to receiving that information in a nonlinear way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. I think we've lost a piece of that, especially in the Western world. You often talk about how losing your brother helped you find the courage to live more bravely and authentic life. Can you share more about how your journey and what you learned from that loss?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for all of us, we have these defining moments in our own timelines where our life did sometimes a 180, but sometimes we thought we were going one way and we end up going another way entirely. And when we lost Brent in January of 2016, and it was a rogue blood clot that broke off into his veins, and he died instantly, there was no sense of premonition that was going to happen. So it was really unexpected, and it was a very tragic loss. And I was far enough along on my own journey, my personal healing, and also as a psychologist, that I knew that either you just move through it, and the only way out for healing is through, or you sidestep it and you're going to have to deal with it years later. Or if you don't want to deal with it at all, you become the wound yourself and project it onto other people. And those weren't options for me. I chose healing, and I wanted the personal evolution that I knew would come, even though grief is really eviscerating. But as I underwent that journey, I really started to think about, what does it mean to not be here anymore? Like, not just like, what is death, but like, when you're not physically present, what opportunities are you missing out that you might experience here on earth? And even though I could clearly feel Brent in the afterlife, and I knew his spirit was free, and I was having a lot of experiences around that, it also struck me that he couldn't enjoy Rocky Road ice cream anymore, and that he would never travel to the places that he wanted to go. And there was all these things that he would never get to do that are such a gift in our earth life. And something about that really made me want to embrace my life in bigger ways. And I started to ask myself the question, are you fully aligned with who you feel called to be in this world? And I wasn't. The answer was no. I had been running my practice for quite a while by then in Alaska, and I felt like there was more growth for me, and that I couldn't stay in those circumstances in order to find that growth. And every time that I started to feel scared, as I allowed myself to venture into what would growth look like, and the answers that started coming to that question, they were big. They were like, close down your physical practice. You can't stay in Alaska. You're going to sell your house. You're moving to the island of Kauai. You're going to release the set income and security, and you're going to just cast yourself into the arms of the universe and say, this is my leap of faith. I believe, I teach this stuff, but now I'm going to live this stuff so I can really teach it. And that's really what came from this, was this desire to live braver and to follow these truths inside of me. And every time I got scared and thought this is too big, I was able to use my brother as a comparison point. And I thought, what might Brent do if he were still here? And what would he tell me to do if he could come give me advice right now? And the sense I got from him was, do it now, don't wait. So here I am.
I love it. And you said in your bio that you got more intuitive after he passed. So what happened? How did that come about?
I started feeling him pretty intensely. And I for me, that was coming through in my mind's eye. When I talk about receiving pictures, I would be having a normal moment where I wouldn't even be thinking about him. And then in my mind's eye, I would just have this really strong sense of Brent's presence. And he felt a little bit like a Patronus to me in Harry Potter, kind of spiritual, a little bit etheric. It felt different than how I had experienced him here, which is one of the reasons that I opened to it, because I had not experienced him like that before. It didn't feel like my imagination. It felt like something otherworldly was opening to me. And then I think what's so beautiful about spirit is, as we're having these experiences, we're often given so many signs and synchronicities to reinforce you can trust this. So I have a whole story around sensing or getting pennies with him. Pennies started showing up everywhere. Feathers started showing up. Hearts in the clouds. One time I had a turquoise stone, and it was a heart stone that I gotten for him, and it had moved from my bedside table to my pillow. I didn't touch it. It was things like that started to happen that really began to clue me in that I was living in something that felt really miraculous. And part of what helped with that is I didn't feel him all the time. I had a lot of moments of very ordinary, heavy grief where I wasn't feeling euphoric and like I was feeling Brent's spirit. I just felt like I was depressed and didn't want to get out of bed. And the fact that I couldn't feel it all the time actually helped me to trust it more. And as I opened to that, that's when I really began to work with the Akashic records and feel called to focus my gifts in more intentional kinds of ways.
Oh, that's a beautiful story. I love how the heart moved over to the pillow. I mean, I've heard many stories. People say, the whole pot, and we can't even lift it, but it moved. It's over there now, right? It's and things like that do happen, and it's the magic of the spirit world.
It is,
Showing them that they are around and they are alive and well on the other side, right?
Absolutely. It's the immaterial making itself material in a way that we can comprehend.
Yeah. And what is alchemy of grief, and how can we use grief to transform our lives?
Alchemy of grief, I think, is using grief as a rite of passage to become a more authentic expression of ourselves. And I think any kind of crisis or hardship can be a rite of passage into our more soulful self. Rites of passage don't always have to be hard, but I do often think that when something breaks us open and cracks us, there's more space there than when life is in a more easy, joyful place. When we're cracked, we go through this massive disruption of consciousness, and life as we knew it all of a sudden isn't adding up the way that we once knew it. And in that disorganization and disarray, and, I always feel like it's like a traffic jam in your neural networks, like somebody came into the roadmap of the brain and the emotional roadmap, and in the middle of the night, like rearranged all the roads and put some dead ends in places and made a loop where it used to be a straightaway. That's kind of how it feels. We feel so flipped upside down during those times. But I think because we're so open and so vulnerable, that we're more open to receiving from our soulful self. We're open to receiving from spirit, and we're open to receiving what's real. And we begin to ask ourselves the question, am I being my most real self? Am I living as authentically as I want to live? Am I embracing my life the way that Brent might have embraced his had he known he only had 6 months left? What might he have done differently? Those questions really allowed me to tap into the transformative nature of grief. And I think when we realize that the things that we grieve in this world truly are connected to a place of love, whether we grieve a person because we've lost that person and we love that person, or whether it's something more global and our heart is just broken by this world because we love humanity or we love the world and we had this expectation attached to how we want it to look, this better vision of how humanity can be. And we don't see that met and something awful happens. It breaks our heart. And for me, the crux of that is really about love. It's about what's in our heart. And so when we can hold on to that, I think we can take grief and use it as this personal alchemy where it transforms us and allows us to live with more courage and more authenticity, and in many ways to own our bigness of heart and to own the amount of love that we hold inside, because you can't hurt as much as so many sensitives and empaths and healers and doctors do. And just any conscious minded soul it only hurts that much because you can love in equal, if not more proportion. And to me, that's transformative.
Yeah, such good advice. What would you say to someone who wanted to follow their dreams and live with greater purpose, but they don't know where or how to begin?
I would tell them start with writing it out on paper. I would start with making a list, only because I'm a big believer. It can be hard to ground our dreams. And going back to that very first question about living grounded in today's, challenges, that's a challenge. I've got all these dreams and I want to live better, but I don't even know where to start. That's a personal challenge. So I think we need to figure out a way to ground it. And there's always a starting point. We can always say, well, I have no idea about the bigger pictures in life, but I want to live with more joy, or I want to live with more intention, or I want to live more intuitively. My personal goal when I moved to Kauai, and I've talked about this quite a bit and written about it, is I just wrote the phrase, I want to live more creatively, intuitively, and spiritually. And I had no idea what that looked like. I had these bits and pieces in place. And I think I said, I don't want to just do one thing. I want to sort of patchwork and collage a living together and a creative service together out of all these different streams. But I didn't know how to ground that. But at least I had this intention of this is what I want. So we can always start with an intention. I'd like to feel more myself. I would like to feel more like I can express myself on my journey. When you set that intention down and you say, okay, I'm committed to this. I don't know what it's going to look like. Maybe I don't have any answers for how it will unfold, but this step I know. And here's one thing I can do this week to be more authentic. Maybe I'll journal and get in touch with my real voice. Maybe I will challenge myself to speak my truth to somebody. We can always figure out an action step. We're incredibly resourceful. So I would say to start there by identifying one or two things that you can do. And the second part of that I would say is just when we make a commitment to the universe and we say, I'm ready for this, and here's the step I'm taking, the universe will answer us. But often it doesn't bring it to us until we've taken that first initial step. And we've said, I'm going to set this into motion. Come meet me there. And I think a lot of us get stuck because we're waiting for a sign, or we're waiting for the steps to perfectly line themselves up, or somebody to give us a roadmap and a blueprint. Here's how it's going to look. Here's your first step.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really work like that. It starts with the intention and one action step towards that intention.
Absolutely. I always tell my own clients, it's like you're rolling a snowball, but you have to start the snowball. You have to start rolling it. But once it gains momentum, it's going to just roll down the hill. So true. You have to set the steps in motion. It doesn't happen by itself, even though we would like to.
We'd love for it to, but I do believe it's our energy and our heart and our commitment that begins to create the path. And that as we start to roll that snowball, that actually opens up the energetic field so that the things that are going to help that snowball roll faster in that direction actually can come to us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you open one door. You have to open the one door in order for the other doors to open, like you said, because you can't see all the different opportunities that are presented, because you have to open that door first to take that step and move in that direction, yes. Right? And to create that energy.
It's beautifully put.
Right?
Yeah, I know.
And then you'll see all the other doors that are going to open up, but you can't see beyond this veil or this shower curtain, right? You only see so much. And you can only see what's in your world right now. But when you start changing your path, then all these other opportunities come, because like you said, the spirit world sort of helps you align things. So
it's so true. Well, and we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
Basic, but But it's true. I was really terrified to close my practice for so many reasons. And just part of that was I'd done it for so long and I couldn't see wrapping up with all the clients or shifting all of them to telehealth, which wasn't as well established as it is now. And there's just all these pieces I couldn't see my way around. Yeah. And I was working with an intuitive healer at the time. And I remember her saying to me, if you think about it like a giant chain link, just open one of the links. Just the fact that you could actually close your practice, start thinking about it mentally, that is possible for you. A new space will open up. And I had to process the thought well before I was ready to do it. But yeah, we have to open to it.
I know when I went to med school in 2012, I was the sole provider for the family. My husband had gotten laid off. It was my paycheck. And, we decided that it was the right thing to do, but it's very scary to take those steps because you're literally wondering how you're going to eat next month. It's not easy. And I'm sure you went through similar things. It's very difficult because you're in an established practice, in your case, to take that step and trust. It comes back to that self-trust that you talked about in the beginning, that we have to trust that messages that we receive, the intuition, the guidance, what feels right in your heart space, and just go for it, as scary as it is. I mean, in worst case, you'll fall and you have to pick yourself back up and start a new path, but you're never going to change anything, right? Until you take that chance and just go for it.
Yeah. And you really can't keep one foot over here, like safety of the shore and say, I'm going to go deep diving into the ocean and life, but I'm still attached to this shore. No, it doesn't work like that. I think we have to allow for the possibility that it can happen. And that will support that. Well, not only that it can happen, but that will be supported in ways that we might not be able to imagine because we've yet to experience them.
Yeah. To go to a little bit of a different question, can we ever truly be healed and whole? And what do you see as our wholeness of being?
I see our wholeness of being as accepting all parts of ourselves to the best of our ability. And can we ever be healed and whole? I think there's a paradox here. I think that part of being human is to be a little bit broken. Part of being human is that we come here and we experience ourselves as separate from each other, separate from source, separate from love, separate from the divine. However, that translates to each of us in our individual way. We come here and we forget that at our core, we are whole and that we are connected and that we are part of love. And I think that part of our growth here as souls on this planet is to go through challenges that break us so we can keep opening up to more love and opening up to more light and opening up to more healing inside of ourselves. So for me, if I recognize that to be broken is to know myself whole, I'm able to see that all the breaks in me are opportunities to bring in more love and to bring in more light and to bring in more grace and compassion and peace for myself. The parts I don't like, the parts that I might be working on changing, the younger selves that I might be embarrassed about or ashamed of or have still an attachment to, all of those pieces of ourselves are just part of what makes us whole. So I see healing, I think, in a much less linear way and more of this. I'm seeing like this big pool in my mind as we're talking. And it feels like every time we reclaim another part of ourselves and say, I can learn to love this, we put more water in that pool. And so we become more healed and we become more whole. But I really think the paradox is recognizing that it's the break that helps us to recognize our wholeness.
That's a great way of looking at things. Keep putting love back in and keep healing. What does it mean to have a spiritual awakening, and how can someone going through an awakening better embrace the experience?
I think a spiritual awakening usually comes through some sort of a crisis. Not always. I just haven't talked to many people who had a spiritual awakening without having something that really shook them up. and made them look around and start to question the reality that they're in. And I think spiritual awakenings can be very connected to the spirit world and connected to wanting to explore spirituality. Maybe somebody has an experience where they recognize there's so much more out there than what they were aware of, and they want to start to know the mysteries and know what's out there. And sometimes I think a spiritual awakening is the spirit of the self, and recognizing that each of us is so much more than what we were told we were, what we were taught to be, that there's something infinite in us that wants to expand. And I think when that part of ourself wakes up, usually what we go through is having a sense of feeling a lack of identity with our own life, or feeling a little disenfranchised from it, or feeling like we've gone through some sort of a schism in self, where who we once were and who we want to become no longer align. And we have to begin to figure out, how do we bring ourselves into deeper integration? Spiritual awakenings usually are really disorienting. Usually we'll find ourselves zeroing in on, maybe it's self-help books or podcasts or spiritual resources that we might have ignored before. And all of a sudden, like, we want to be filled with that stuff because we're looking for answers that cannot be answered in mainstream culture, especially in Western society. So I think that's what an awakening looks like. And part of navigating an awakening is one of two things. I think either you say yes to it and you continue to open, and to use an Alice in Wonderland analogy, you let yourself go down the rabbit hole and you go to Wonderland and you think you're going a little bit crazy, but you stay with it. Or you can try and shut it down and control your life, and you can try and put everything, like put the genie back in the bottle and put things back exactly the way that they were before. But usually what happens with that is it's unsustainable, because your soul is so much stronger than the egoic self that just wants to maintain control. And it's usually bound and determined to have its way with us. So it will normally keep bringing us the circumstances we need until we say, okay, I yield. There's something here for me to learn. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm opening up to it.
And why do you think that things sometimes seem to fall apart when we're doing our best to follow and live in alignment with our hearts?
I love this question because I lived this question. Very much so. My first couple of years on the island of Kauai, I saw a lot of things fall apart in my life. And first of all, I would say to anybody who's experienced that, I would just offer the compassion of, that's a horrible feeling when you've actually taken the leap of faith, or you said, I'm showing up, and I'm going to answer yes to the call of my soul, the spirit, to my heart, whatever it is. And you expect things to begin to align, and all of a sudden they begin to fall apart more. That's a really tough experience of self to go through. And it definitely makes us question our path. But how the best metaphor that I can use to describe this is to think about a plant that was in a pot, and this plant has outgrown this pot. And this plant really needs to be transplanted and uprooted and planted into new soil. And so what it begins to find is the old pot doesn't fit anymore. And as it continues to grow, the pot might even crack. It might start to have a lot of growing pains that come from it. The things that aren't serving it begin to fall away. And when we say yes to a spiritual awakening, and we say yes to aligning with ourselves, I think what begins to happen is the things that aren't in alignment begin to fall away. And sometimes that's really shocking and it's hurtful. But at the same time, the invitation is for us to grow deeper roots into new beliefs, into new ways of being, into a new understanding of who we are. And as we grow those deeper roots, I really think we're like that plant who not only gets transplanted into new soil, but realizes, like, I'm not a plant at all. I'm a tree, and I'm growing high, and I need a lot of space to grow. So I really think it's a matter of things unaligning to ultimately help us align in an even greater way.
Love that analogy. How can we find the courage to keep becoming bigger than our fears and our limitations, so that we keep moving in the direction of love?
I think courage is found when we look at the alternative. And the alternative is, what happens if nothing changes? What happens if I stay stuck in the cycle? What happens if I never step out on a limb and do the same? And am I going to be okay with what happens? I think it's just asking ourselves the question and doing a little bit of fast forwarding in our life and saying, when is this change going to happen if I don't say, yes, I agree to this? And when we realize that nothing is going to change if we don't change, the world around us will change, our circumstances will change, some things will change. But when it really comes to embracing life and embracing our dreams in a bigger way, we're really the ones who have to say yes to that. And so if the alternative is, no, I'm always saying no because I want fear to win, well, how does that make you feel? And how do you feel when you think about yourself a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and you still haven't done it? And there's no judgment in those questions. Those are just the questions that I asked myself to try and find the courage that I needed. And what usually happens with that is I'm like, well, I don't like how I feel. I didn't come here. I'm not showing up to stay, to keep things in status quo. I want the change. So I think that's a way to tap into those reservoirs of courage inside of us. And the other thing that I really think about all the time is that we are transforming fear as we create courage. And so sometimes when I still feel stuck in fear, I'll just ask myself, do you want to stay in this old story, this old way of being, this old limitation, or do you want to transform it? And if my answer is yes, even if I'm terrified, I will work with this affirmation of I'm transforming fear in a younger way of being, and I'm creating in its place more space, more confidence, more courage. It feels good to affirm that inside of ourselves. And I think when we can align with that energy, it helps us be a little bit more likely to do the thing, whatever that thing is, whether it's to press send, make the phone call, put ourselves out there, whatever that is for each of us. It helps us find more strength to do that.
Mm-hmm. I know you've written several books. Some of them are Revelations from the Sky, Transformations of the Sun, Lamentations of the Sea, and many more books. Can you talk a little bit about these books and what they're about, and why someone should read them or how it can help them?
Absolutely. Well, the ones that you mentioned specifically are actually a trilogy. And the trilogy began with Lamentations of the Sea back in 2016 when I lost Brent. And what happened is I was already writing and using writing in a cathartic way. I already was writing a lot of poetry, which is what a lot of my other books are. But I really felt like part of what wanted to come out of my grief journey was a book on grief. And I didn't feel like I was meant to write it in a traditional way. I felt like, where there's just chapter 1 through however many, and it sort of dissects grief. That didn't feel right for me. And what happened with those books is I was in Oregon running in this ancient oak forest. And I say the trees gave me the idea, but I had this idea where I thought, well, why write it traditionally? Why don't you write 111 passages and put together all the poetry, personal essays, meditations, reflections from all different perspectives that you've had during this time? And that was the beginning of Lamentations of the Sea. It really traces my grief journey through losing Brent. And the writing that's included in there are pieces that happened during the initial loss, during the subsequent months. I could not rewrite those things right now if I wanted to, because I just can't put myself back in that same space that I was in at the time. And when I got over to the island of Kauai, I realized that the story wasn't done. There was more that needed to be told. And I felt guided to write the next one, Transformations of the Sun, and then the final one, Revelations of the Sky. And it really tells the story of losing Brent, using grief, the alchemy of grief, to transform myself, finding a deeper sense of love in the process, my spiritual gifts awakening, and finding the courage to live the dream. And I think that there's a lot of psychological insight in there, and there's a lot of just resonance on what it is to be human, whether or not you're dealing with a specific loss. But there's a lot of information in there that I think really has resonated with the individuals who read it, that really helps them find something for their transformation journey and gives them permission to take that journey and to allow for the mess and the brokenness in order to know themselves whole.
It sounds like just beautiful books. And you've also written children's books, right?
Yes, I do have a children's book out called Tallulah Talks to Nature that I illustrated and that I wrote about a little girl named Tallulah and her pet parakeet Tuesday. And she is sentient to the voices of nature. And in the book, she travels throughout different parts of, she lives on an island. And as she goes from different element to element, the trees, the ground, the ocean, the stars, they all have something to teach her about the wisdom that they have to share. That was a very, very fun book to write.
That sounds like a great book for a child. How can people work with you? Do you have a website, Facebook, Instagram?
All of the above. I do. I have a website, drbethanne.com. I am on Facebook and Instagram under Dr. BethAnne KW. And there's lots of ways to engage with me, from following along. I usually do some form of a monthly free pop-up oracle party that I host, where individuals are welcome to come and we do a guided meditation, and I do free intuitive readings for the individuals who attend. I do, for more formal work, I offer one-on-one sessions where I do individualized Akashic readings. And I also do creative soul sessions, which are a bit more of a therapeutic healing hybrid mixed with spiritual insight and information. And I run monthly classes, usually monthly every 6 weeks, where I'm doing some sort of a workshop or some sort of a class with a group of individuals. And those are really fun. And I've definitely found some amazing people in the community through doing that. So those are great opportunities too.
And do you have a workshop coming up soon, or?
I do. I launching on September 16th. I am doing a next level soul care for sensitives. And this came out of doing a part 1 to this series that I just finished, Soul Care for Sensitives. And it got such a great response that I had so many people still wanting to take the course that I decided to offer like fresh material and to bring in more information, because there's so many topics that can come in underneath that. But we have been looking at boundaries and healing wounds with toxic individuals and standing in our own power. And I think the big question when you are a sensitive soul in this world, which is really, how do I stay in my own energy instead of always feeling in the energy of everybody else? And how can I be empowered in my own energy and know when I'm not in my energy and I've taken on somebody else's stuff? So that's coming up September 16th and 23rd. And part of what I'm really excited to offer with this is over 3 hours, I think, of readings from the Akashic Records, channeled audio, where I've been going into the records and opening up topics like, how do we embrace sensitivity as a superpower? How do we heal the wounds with toxic people? And there's just some really beautiful guidance that the records have to share on those topics that I find illuminating and also very practical and relevant for our world today.
Wow, that sounds like so much fun. So I'm going to be putting your website and your Facebook and Instagram in the podcast notes. And the information about your workshop and everything is on your website?
Yes.
Okay, so people, you can just go there.
Yeah. If you go to the website, you can click on the link. Yeah, it's up at the top, so it's easy to find.
Perfect. So just go check that out. Go to the podcast notes and you'll find the link to her website and her workshops and Facebook and Instagram if you want to follow her there. And I just want to thank you so much for being a guest today. It's been really fun to have you as a guest and sharing all your knowledge with the listeners.
Thank you so much. It's really been delightful chatting with you. I'm grateful and appreciative. And thank you, listeners who joined us.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Dr. Lottie, Science with Soul. To stay up to date on future episodes and to help us reach a larger audience, remember to subscribe, review, and share this podcast. If you're a person who understands the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul, and would like to take one of my courses or work with me to create a path of healing your own life, please visit divinespiritualessence.com or drlottie.com. My book, Med School After Menopause, The Journey of My Soul, an inspirational story about transformation, healing, and spirituality, is available online at Amazon as well as other online platforms worldwide.